Hi, I'm David, and this is Build to Succeed from Very Good Ventures. Today we meet with Phil Rabin, Director of Mobile Engineering at SoFi. We discuss what it's like to lead a very large Flutter team, navigate complexity in platform engineering, and how to leverage AI and automation for better developer productivity. It's a great conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. So here's Phil. Phil, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for spending some time with us. I thought maybe to get us started, I wanted to ask you a question, maybe about something that you do outside of work that helps you be a better leader at work.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I am a podcast fiend. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I pretty much always have a podcast on if I'm, doing dishes or working out or riding my bike or something. I love kind of having a constant stream of information and keeping up to date with what's happening in the industry. I've got a bunch of favorite podcasts I like to listen to. I mean, I love kind of the more techie kind of business podcasts like Lex Friedman, Scott Galloway, Diary of a CEO, Tim Ferriss. There's something to learn. I'm all over it.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, you're in a good spot for that then. You'll get to listen to us talking pretty soon. Why don't you kick
Yeah,
us off by telling us a little bit about your journey? I know you're at SoFi now. You've worked at Uber. Catch people up to where you started to how you got to where you are today.
sure. I mean, I'm originally from Canada. I was living in Vancouver. I actually started coding when I was about 15 years old back in the 90s. I was kind of an early adopter of web technology. Surprisingly, I was probably one of the first, probably the only people in the entire high school that was really into computers at the time, and not just computer games, but actually building websites. So after college, started at the CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I always like to say it's the BBC for Canada, for people who don't know what it is. And I got an early taste of building things that people actually like. We built a pretty popular digital music streaming service called CBC Radio 3. It was kind of the backbone of indie music in Canada. So it was really exciting. We were kind of SoundCloud before SoundCloud. We were a peer-to-peer social music streaming platform. I remember even the SoundCloud came out after us. We actually were innovating on a lot of the live streaming interactive stuff early on. And then, I worked at another tech company after that, and then did my way to San Francisco and worked at a startup, kind of went under, classic story. And then very shortly after that, joined Uber. And I was one of the first engineers, like the first 75 and one of the first mobile engineers at Uber as well. So, I joined as a web developer and then learned a mobile pretty much on the job. So it was a pretty exciting time to be there. As it was one of the hottest startups at the time. We were growing like crazy, mobile first. Again, I really got a taste for building products that people like to use. And I thought that's kind of cool. It's like being in a band that has a hit song. And then it kind of grew with the company. Rapid growth, just staying in place took a lot of effort. So to actually grow the company is just kind of it was nonstop. You're eating, breathing, living, coding, working all the time. It's just, that was kind of the culture at the time. But I really got got a taste of having to scale. Everything was about scale there. Grow. Code base is growing, engineering teams growing. After about 3 years, I moved into management and started what's called the Rider platform team, which is a mobile platform team for the Rides app. And grew that group. I had 3 teams in 3 different cities. And then as time went on, I actually switched over and worked on e-mobility, which like those jump bikes and scooters. Then after that, I went and started the Eats platform team, and moved on. Eventually, I was there for about 10 years in total. And so I really saw it from like about a 300-person company when I joined to like 30,000. I had to kind of grow through all the phases of it, from startup to large corporate multinational. So that's pretty cool to go through all the different phases. Usually people kind of turn over after a few years. You get different types of people that come through the door, but I had kind of learn those different phases, and it was awesome. And then ended up at SoFi after that.
What an incredible moment in time to be part of like front end user experience for a company like Uber. I mean, if you think about where you started relative, all of a sudden you're doing like scooters and stuff and Eats, which probably if you went back to the first couple of years you were there, it probably would have been like wild to think about where you would end up. And I think Uber for me always was a classic example of like somebody who was really doing mobile, right? One of the things I always loved about Uber was like so many companies want to like keep you in the app, like how much time spent in the app. And I always loved the Uber design aesthetic of like, no, open the app, let me do the thing and actually get me in the car. I don't want to be glued to this thing. I want to be like super efficient. And I always really respected Uber's design, UX, and technology from that perspective.
Yeah, we cared a lot about that, about compressing the time. It's pretty much time to tap, time to ride. Everything was about the speed and efficiency. How fast can we get the app to launch? How quickly can we get you the ride? Can we keep shortening that, making the network more efficient, making everything more efficient? And because it just drove more rides. But yeah, it's
You went through a
definitely an app first experience.
Awesome. And you went through, as you're saying in that story, you went through this journey of kind of being a member of the team into a more engineering leadership and management role over time. How did that happen for you? And what were some of the kind of key pivotal moments or key lessons learned that helped you grow into becoming the engineering leader you are today?
Yeah, so I actually was a manager before when I was at Vancouver, so I did get some training and I got a taste of it. I think generally I had a kind of a natural inclination to kind of leading the team. I mean, you kind of recognized that early on, and it offered for me, grow a new team. And I was just kind of in my late 20s. I thought it was a little bit early at the time. I wasn't ready to kind of like get off the keyboard and just be in meetings all day. So I actually went back to IC, moved to San Francisco, kind of like, retooled out of like the .NET world and to more of the open source stuff. And I think that was good. I think I needed more maturity before moving into management. I'd encourage anyone who's looking for management, like it's okay to be an IC for a while, like sit in that, like, build that respect of your peers, really learn your stuff, ship products, learn how the kind of the workflow works. And then at Uber there was so much growth and turnover in my first few years that I ended up having about 6 different managers in the first 3 years. It was a little bit chaotic. Managers were coming and going so much, and it was kind of like unstable. So in that period, I just kind of took over the team. I just started like running Scrum, running our process, running planning, and a manager would pop in and maybe last for a few months and then move on to the next thing. And so I was kind of like that stable person in the team that was just tech leading and mentoring people because we just needed it. And so when it ended up happening is that management was like, hey, yeah, seems like you're already doing the job. Why don't you just, start this team? Because I'd been proposing to we probably need a platform team. We need, someone who's just going to be like dealing with the overall app architecture and a lot of the tooling. Bringing in new libraries, working with our kind of like central. We had a mobile platform team that was central, but no real platform team that was dedicated to like our app, because Rider app is just like an operating system. It's just so huge, hundreds of engineers working on it, but you needed a team that's coordinating all that. And so they offered for me to start that team. And so it just kind of like slipped right into it. It was, I pulled over a bunch of my peers, and I'd already been kind of like, garnering the respect of the team and working a lot on the foundations of the app. So I was working on app architecture and foundational pieces anyway. So it's just a continuation of what I was doing.
That's awesome. Now let's talk about SoFi, right? When did you move to SoFi? And I know you've undergone a similar massive scale effort there, like a stepping up, and sounds like more scale in the future. What got you over to SoFi? What was the org like when you started, and how has it evolved?
Yeah. So after Uber, I took some time off. I mean, I think it was well-deserved, 10 years of grinding it out. I think I was ready for a break. So I took about 5 months off, and discovered something about myself that I actually, got bored pretty quick, and I wasn't really ready to retire. And I was just seeing the AI boom starting to happen. I was like, I got to get back on the field. This is, it's too exciting. There's too much stuff happening. I am not meant to be just a kind of a stay home kind of guy on my phone, or just, even just going and playing outside. And like, that kind of like runs out of excitement pretty quick. So I was looking around for different opportunities. I was definitely looking for that director scope. I've been essentially doing that level of work at Uber, like the rides organization, for example, was like 1,000 people. And we probably had about 100 mobile engineers, and I was leading platform work for that. So I was looking, for something maybe similar size or bigger, or something that would become bigger. I was just kind of like threw myself out there, and was interviewing and, networking. And then the SoFi opportunity came around, and it just checked all the boxes. For me, it was like I had a kind of a laundry list of things that I was like, to help me eliminate opportunities, like, too small of a company. I didn't really want to go back to a startup. I didn't want to go work at a company about Google size or a Meta or something. So I was looking for that sweet spot of a growth company that was, maybe struggling on the scaling phase. And so I felt like that's where my skills could be best applied, was the actual scaling part. Like, let's go from, that intermediate size, we're kind of like getting out of the startup phase, to like big company, big code bases, large teams. I'd done that a couple times at Uber on the ride side and the eat side. So I think I had to kind of cut my teeth and understood some things about scaling teams. And so when SoFi came around, like the growth story was really compelling. It's consumer brand, mobile first, the mobile first bank. I had a kind of a nice product. And then just as we were talking, I was talking to my director, Kevin, your senior director, and he was talking about some of the needs and to scale the team, scale the code base, and that we really want to be a top 10 financial institution, and build like a financial super app. And I was like, this seems really exciting. This is a cool opportunity. So I took it. Yeah, and I've been very happy.
Yeah, that's all. I'm curious about the scaling side of it, right? I think, a lot of engineers are out there in a lot of different spots, small startups, big companies where they've maybe already scaled. What are some of the, like, when you talk about scaling, like, what are the unique things that you're really focused on? You mentioned team, you mentioned kind of code base, some things like architecture. Like, when you think about scaling up a system, or maybe when you came into SoFi, like, what were the top 3 or 4 or 5 areas of focus you really put energy into?
Yeah. So when I think about scale, like what worked for you as a small shop or a small code base starts to break down. That's typically what happens, right? I mean, you can build a product in like a Ruby on Rails backend, for example. You like one database, one server, and like a web app on top. Like, great. I mean, that gets you started. What happens though when you have like 1 million users or 10 million users, right? Like all those assumptions that you made about like how many connections you can maintain, or how big your database is getting, right? You start having to shard your database, start introducing microservices, and those concepts. It's like, although mobile apps are a little bit different, but so those ideas start to you need to apply different types of thinking, right? So what happens when you have 100 or 200 people working in one code base at the same time? All those assumptions about like your module structure and your build start to break down. Even like things like indexing the code base start to fail. Your CI, right? Maybe you ran a couple nodes in your CI. Now you've got, potentially hundreds and hundreds of merge requests coming in a day, maybe 500, 1,000. Your test runs start slowing down. And now you're starting getting a lot of engineers. I call them kind of like busy intersections start forming, where you had like your one big file that had, maybe a couple thousand lines of code. Now it's reaching 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,000 lines of code, and the complexity is starting to bog the teams down. You don't have a design system, so now your app looks different everywhere, and you start having to struggle managing that. So those are types of scaling challenges that you start to see, and we have to address those as we go through and start planning and making assumptions like, hey, we're at 110 engineers right now. Like, we're probably going to have 200 by next year. Like, what does that look like? You have to do capacity planning, and start looking at all of your pipelines and planning to try to, speed up development time, speed up onboarding, speed up your CI runs. And you're looking for efficiencies across your entire pipeline, because really you're generating like a giant code factory, and that code has to go out every single week. So the automation across every part of your stack, because even just, pushing code out becomes a big effort. Getting everything tested is a big effort. So all those things need to scale up.
So that's super interesting, because when you talk about problems of scale, and I know SoFi now is one of the largest like Flutter companies out there in terms of number of Flutter engineers and complexity of the code base, number of lines of code. How have you brought that sort of scaling mentality to a Flutter code base, which is a relatively new technology, maybe not as many engineers, maybe not as many best practices and standards and tools and things? Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah. So first of all, the decision to use Flutter was made before my entry into the company. I think it's an awesome decision. I mean, truly, now that I've been working with it, I'm like ecstatic. I think I would promote it to more companies. I think especially seeing at Uber, just the Herculean effort to get like 2 apps out constantly, and just the pipelines and just dealing with the feature set and trying to keep the feature set in sync with each other, having to hire, constantly trying to keep our levels of engineers about balance, because sometimes someone quits, leaves the company or whatever, we overhire in one area, and now we've got, 3 mobile engineers and 3 iOS and 1 Android, or vice versa on a team. And now suddenly, the iOS roadmap starts to accelerate ahead and the Android roadmap kind of falls behind. What we saw also is that Android development usually just took longer. Like you just had more devices to test against. There's more fragmentation. Getting UI to be really, look perfect was really, really difficult when supporting old versions of Android, newer things. Where on Flutter, I mean, it's pixel perfect. I mean, across all the devices, we rarely have a device specific rendering issue. I mean, it's almost never. It's just not what happens. It's because the rendering engine ships with the binary, so we can have a lot of fine tuned control over how the layout works. And then coming into SoFi, though, I mean, we really were just like, a few years ago, kind of like a startup. I mean, like most of the hirings happened in the past couple of years. And so the team kind of like maybe wasn't totally prepared for how quickly we grew. And so there really weren't the foundations in place for what I call an institution. We had a bunch of engineers writing code, pretty much converting from Android and iOS engineering to Flutter engineering, kind of learning on the go. So really didn't have a lot of training, so not really consistent practices. And the information about how to do things the right way really wasn't published anywhere. So as you start to scale, you really can't have like, a bottleneck. You don't want to have your team bottleneck on single engineers. So I've got, I when I first joined, I'm like, where do you get your information? I just surveyed people. I'm like, started talking around the organization, and they all pointed to one guy. They're like, that guy's got, all the information in his head. So it was
Classic.
like kind of like a 6-month effort to try to like dump what was in his head into documentation. We had, hundreds of pages of out of date information that I had to archive, because it was confusing people. So you got to think about really, really kind of like, keeping your written documentation and what you want out of your engineers and your values and your principles, your coding guidelines and practices and process. All of that needs to be written. That's just like the first thing you have to do if you're going to scale any organization. And I think even small teams should be doing it, because something that's almost a constant is that new people are going to be coming in to your org all the time. People are leaving. Even if your headcount's flat, you have to assume that like maybe, 10 to 20% of your workforce is going to be turning over every single year. And those are new people you've got to train over and over again. You might get different outcomes depending on what team they land on. If you don't have anything written, you don't have good training in place. So that's absolutely critical. And then, in general, I'm thinking about like, creating a really resilient culture. So it's kind of steering the culture away from just only moving fast, but towards quality, towards, like changing the values of the organization, the mobile organization as a whole, like really focusing on testing and really focusing on good architecture, solid code reviewing, those things that you kind of take for granted. And, maybe some people care about it, but other people don't. Some teams really are enforcing the practices. We all have to live in one code base, which is different than like, maybe backend services. You could have these little microservices and you kind of get to federate. But in mobile, everyone's living in the same soup. So you got to make sure that everybody's following best practices, because one line of code can basically take down your app. So we're really trying to enforce feature flagging. We've been, having test coverage requirements, and now bringing in like, new design systems, trying to get consistent UI. So, all those things you have to start kind of bringing to the organization, and you don't get it for free. You got to build that stuff out. And it's a lot of work to kind of like ramp up. And then once you invest in it though, then it's basically repeatable, right? You get, consistent outcomes on every team. You should be able to go to every single, part of the code base, and it should look relatively the same. That's the kind of the long-term goal here, that I shouldn't have like one team doing really, really high quality work and the other team kind of like maybe just learning on the go and not necessarily knowing what they should be doing.
I love that, because I think so many people focus on the tools or the frameworks, and they get these sort of like religious wars around what type of framework to use, or language, or state management package, or whatever it is, right? And I think so much of it is, yeah, like, are we aligned on values? Are we going to do things consistently and have consistent standards that we're going to all hold ourselves accountable to?
Yeah, and I think that's why having it written in a central place means that people can argue over the written outcome. You can say, we're going to change the policy, or we're going to change the process, we're going to change that rule. Fine, that's great. That's good. But at least we have a rule, we have some process, and that anyone can point to. And what I found over time is, as you know, one of my rules for my team was, don't respond to a Slack message without a wiki link. And that rule is really good because it means, like, am I responding with documentation, or am I just kind of like responding to this question? And if you respond with documentation, totally changes your posture to be like, well, what is the right way to do things, and where are we going to put it? How are we going to format it? And then the next time the question comes up, you don't have to answer that question again, because here's the documentation, here's documentation. And so that's something I saw over time too, is that as we started really investing in the process and policies and documentation, that engineers were sharing those links and short circuiting discussions in Slack. So it's actually more efficient because you don't have, 300 line message, like 300 messages in a row of people all arguing and talking about something. We like get out of that Slack message and get into the wiki. So then we can all just coalesce around that and then share the link. And then next time share the link. And then that question never has to get answered again.
And a big theme here has been scalability, like this big part of your career, the things that you've learned and grown. And, again, kind of putting the emphasis in places where we, as people doing these things, we kind of focus on sort of these false things to look at, which is like, oh, how fast did it compile? Or the API response was 50 milliseconds instead of 500 or whatever. But you've talked a lot about teams. And I think so much of scale is like, is the team itself high performing? And that's a lot of times not even a technology influence thing at all. It's like, do we have the right standards? How do we operate? So it sounds like really investing in teams and structures has been a key part of your management philosophy.
Absolutely. I would say code, anyone can write code. And in fact, code is becoming free to write. It's like, what do we do? How do we do it? Is it understandable? Are we all on the same page? Are we working well together? Is the energy good? Like, just, I think about just negative energy can really just suck take the wind out of someone's sails. They become less productive. They don't want to come to work. It's a drag. So it's really making sure that the morale continues to be high, that people stay focused, that they work well together, that there's, even like personal conflicts are weeded out early. And, that's usually improved with good clarity, with good process and systems and clear lines of ownership. You make sure that, if you're the tech lead, that like you're the final decision maker, right? So I'm gonna create a structure to make sure that, like, hey, you're the directly responsible individual on this. I'm gonna go to you for questions, and if there's maybe an engineer or two working under you, I'm not going to undermine you and go to the person who's kind of like call it reporting to you for the duration of the project. I'm going to go always to the tech lead to make sure that the decision making flows in one direction. And so I think those types of things give people more confidence that they're doing the right thing, that they know, who to talk to, that if there's a disagreement, we can kind of like have a really clear chain of escalation. I think that's the stuff that can sink an engineering organization. Again, the code, anyone can write code. You can go to a boot camp and learn how to write code. And especially the AI tools, which is where we are cranking out code. That's usually not the bottleneck now.
Right. I know you're scaling and modernizing a very large code base with a lot of people. You mentioned that you'll be hiring, growing that team quite a bit. And I think your number of lines of code in one of our early conversations you're talking about, that's growing like on an increasingly accelerated path. Can you kind of dig into that a little bit? And maybe give us like how big is this at SoFi? Like how big is this application?
Yeah, so we, in the first couple years of rewriting the Flutter app, we added probably about 1 million lines of code. And then just last year alone, we added another 1 million. So but we added about 500,000 lines just in the last quarter. So we're looking at a pretty steep curve. AI tools and just the growth of the engineering team combined is starting to kind of like really make a steep increase. So the current rate, if nothing changes, just our current rate will be at around, probably another doubling next year, about 400,000 lines of code.
Wow.
So the weight of the code is starting to kind of get heavy, right? You're dealing with like even just switching branches and, dealing with code gen, dealing with, indexing and builds are turning to, we're starting to feel that drag, and it's not going to get better unless you really invest in it. we've been throwing hardware at the problem, just temporarily. And every single person in the entire company got brand new like M4 Maxes, just because we were able to show some data that, we can compile faster. We can just generally work faster. So that was a no-brainer, but hardware can only take you so far before you start having to like really start restructuring your code and doing more incremental builds, parallelization, and being a little smarter with your resources.
So all those lines of code, is that humans? Is that AI? What's driving that acceleration?
Combination. Yeah. Code is code, right? Some of it is code gen. A lot of it's unit tests. You think about unit tests are probably like, 4 or 5 or 6 to 1 of, unit test code to, application code. So yeah. And then just your Cursor and Claude are cranking out a lot of code. So, and it's not even that much code, right? If you think about, um, adding 120,000 lines of code per month, that's only 1,000 lines per engineer, 250 a week. Cursor can generate you 500 lines of code in a second. So, and especially test code. We just built we just put out a new product called SoFi Pay, and just a small team was able to write 1,000 tests for that product, and did so. That was over the course of a couple months. So it's adding a lot of code faster. So that's something to deal with.
Do you think that when you think about the scaling of code, both people and AI enablement that comes with that, and sort of the operational, has Flutter helped or hurt or just neutral relative to your past experience or other platforms?
For sure help. Just having one language, one framework, one code base to deal with means that we don't have to like split our effort, be like, okay, here's, all of our AI rules for iOS. Here's all of our AI rules for Android. We get to like really just as an organization invest in one set of tools, one code base, one set of training, one best practice, everything. So, Flutter has made it just dead easy, comparatively. I kind of cringe at now the thought of having to maintain 2 independent platform teams and 2 sets of code bases, everything, and then trying to keep those in balance. Just be way more of a headache these days.
Yeah, and yet so many people are still doing it.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're invested, they're deep into it. And so, but I think rewriting, with AI tools now is also much easier. You can,
Yeah.
essentially
And do you have
transpile
any
your app
concerns about scalability in terms of third-party tools or anything about the engine or the framework that could keep up with that as you go forward?
um, I think what's hard with AI tools is just getting it to do the right thing. The hallucinations, just the correctness. We put a lot of effort into building up a lot of our markdown files with, do's and don'ts, best practices to coax the agent to do the right thing. Um, as your code base scales, like Cursor, really, you think about it, what the secret sauce of Cursor is kind of a coordination layer across your code base to try to reduce the context window so it can actually talk to agents, because you can't actually put your whole code base in the context window for an agent. So you have to try to, reduce the context window as much as possible and operate on small chunks of code. We've looked at some vendors that claim they can work on like much larger code bases. So that there's some opportunity there for us, I think, with the tool set to try to index the entire code base. There's some vendors out there, but generally that's the hard part with AI. It's just getting it to do the right thing. It's really great at the function scope, but I seem to say like refactor all of my code base, and you just can't do it.
Right.
Not today, at least.
Yeah. When you think about the next level of scale for you guys, what are the kind of major hot items you're thinking about? Is it like architectural, testing, automation? What are the main things you're focused on?
Yeah, for us next year. So we've got the way that the app was set up was it followed Flutter best practices for the time, and was probably a good layout. If you're dealing with a small app, you probably would have been fine. I'm sure lots of small companies would never outgrow that. But most of the code is in one package. It's well organized within the directory structure itself, into features, libraries, that kind of stuff. but it just means that that one package keeps growing and growing and growing and growing. So we've actually started an effort. We call it internally call it Project Athens, but it's a move to modularize the code base. So extracting features, extracting libraries, having kind of service packages and networking packages, trying to like, organize this app. And then bringing in Riverpod. So we did an analysis of all sorts of different architectures. We had a working group that was building prototypes, looking at all the frameworks out there. And then we landed on Riverpod after we thought was some really, really good demos, and it did everything we wanted. So we wanted, real dependency management. I think we wanted to use like the providers. We wanted to have scopes and actual like structures. And then we wanted to be able to do dependency inversion for the packages, and then actually have better unit tests. So I think one of the big things would be maybe a miss on the early architecture was bringing in service locator, which is get it. It's fine when you're small, but having singletons of singletons of singletons throughout the entire code base actually starts to break down as you have a really big code base. So we end up with things like flaky unit tests. Like unit tests shouldn't be flaky. They're only flaky if you're mixing state, globally. And we try to like shard our test runs across a lot of different instances because they're starting to slow down. And what happens is that when you're running your test, and you made some assumptions about global state and you run it on your machine, sure, it works. But then suddenly when you start sharding and that global state actually gets mutated or you have synchronization issues, now you've got tests that are doing weird behaviors. So we're trying to get away from that and move towards a real dependency injection, constructor injection, and then start breaking down these packages. So that's going to be a big effort, lifting and shifting, and then moving our dependencies out of the service locator, having you vended from from the called components or DI graph. Yeah.
That's super cool. I mean, hopefully, as you guys land on that and get some best practices in place, I'm sure a lot of people will be interested to see where you land. That modularization of such a large, complicated code base. We're getting to this point in Flutter's evolution where we're starting to see companies achieve that or get to that need. And I think that's like sort of this uncharted territory of best practices and opportunity. So
yeah, we did it. Uber, in the early days, the first version of the app suffered the exact same fate. I mean, I've seen this and, say been around the block a few times where we had kind of one package and the builds, and we had a similar growth story. But we're probably gonna have more engineers working on one app than we did even at Uber on the Rides app. And we saw the packages and the build times just start to explode and grow. And then we ended up trying to do it kind of like while we were running the app. That was quite difficult, and then we ended up just doing a whole rewrite. And that gave us the kind of a clean slate to bring modules and package structures and all that stuff. We ended up with about, a couple hundred modules per app. So, no stranger to like large architectures. I mean, you can get to a certain size and that becomes a problem unto itself. Your tool chain starts to break down even at a certain scale. I don't think we're going to hit that, scaling problem for a while. If we start modularizing the app correctly, I would assume we'd probably end up with probably like, 20 or 30 packages by next year, which is totally, maintainable.
Right. One of the things, there's this idea of like Conway's law, right? Which is like the shape of your product starts to mimic the shape of your team. I'm curious how your team is organized and how you kind of deploy people within the organization, especially since you are doing Flutter, where the most natural first cut is like iOS or Android. You don't really have that problem. And potentially, as you have multiple apps running Flutter, people become pretty fungible. What is the sort of organizational structure you guys are pursuing or might look to move to in the future?
Yeah, we follow we follow a kind of matrix organization, much like a lot of bigger companies, business units or business verticals. And all those business verticals are going to be building their own features and then, committing code to the one trunk essentially of the code base. We use feature flagging a lot to enable that so that we don't necessarily have teams breaking other teams' code as they're rolling out new features. And then we have, a big platform team. I think right now with contractors and probably got about 23 people. And so, I think as you start to scale and you have, vertical teams and you've got platform teams, you really have to invest in platform. So I think it's you really can't get to this scale without having a really strong platform team. Um, and the goal there is to make product engineering fast and easy. You want the product teams to be able to crank out new features, get products to market really fast, iterate on UIs, find the product market, onboard new users, try it. I mean, you should be experimental, and you should be able to, um, slap together a UI quickly like Legos, get it out there, try it out. If it doesn't work, shut it down. We'll try again. That's what we want to see out of product teams. But you've got to provide the tooling to unlock that. So you really need to have like really talented, usually far more senior level. I've got a lot of staff engineers. I work with principal engineer. So I try to skew the seniority of the platform team to far more senior. People have worked on big apps, worked in big teams, and understand how to scale stuff.
That's awesome. As you clearly have seen quite a number of amazing experiences in terms of building teams, both at Uber and going through that whole journey, and SoFi, you're on this incredible upward trajectory. Is there like a leadership principle or two you've learned along the lines or along the way that you would share with an either up and coming person or someone in your shoes? Like, what is a takeaway that you have discovered that has really helped you lead?
Yeah, I mean, generally, I really like the principle of like radical candor, right? Where you care deeply, you're giving them a lot of feedback, and I like to be like deeply involved in people's careers and make sure that they're growing. I really want people to be right on that edge of comfort. You're kind of like out of your comfort zone. You're kind of in that state of flow where you're not pushed so far off the deep end, you don't know how to swim. Maybe the waves come crashing down on you. Rather have you just on that edge where you're learning, you're growing, you're working towards the next level. We're constantly checking in, making sure that you are moving in the right direction. I really don't want to have people be stagnant, just kind of like hanging out their level for 10 years, whatever. I'd rather have people always be working towards the next level. So strong encouragement that we're, working towards that next promotion, figuring out, working our way backwards. Well, what do it take to get there? And I think when you provide that for engineers, they get really motivated. They think that like, hey, this person believes in me. There's a path to move forward. I'm given those opportunities. I can step up and grow into that opportunity. I think that's motivating and exciting for people. And, they get motivated to come to work because they know that there's a path for them to grow. And I think every single person on the team, you should be given that opportunity.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. That's great leadership advice. One final question about Flutter specifically, obviously given our role in BGV and being deeply in the Flutter ecosystem. What advice or comments would you have for somebody who's kind of out there sitting on the sidelines looking at Flutter and being like, I don't know, native seems the pure way to do it, given that you've seen both? I mean, you have, I think, are very credible in that you've led very large teams, both at Uber, which is one of the arguably most complicated mobile apps or teams that are out there, and now SoFi. What kind of guidance or advice would you give to someone who's evaluating that decision?
I mean, it's never been easier to learn new stuff. Like even, most engineers that we hire are Android and iOS because it's actually very hard to find, staff level or senior level Flutter engineers because it's so new. Most folks have either been tinkering with it or worked on small apps, maybe as a hobbyist or something. So we have to train people. We have to teach them. And so most people pick it up pretty easily. Like you'd be surprised. There's, even web developers, because Dart is pretty much JavaScript anyway. And the documentation out there is great, but also, I mean, Cursor in the agent is conversational. You can be like, teach me stuff. And so I feel like a lot of engineers with Cursor have been learning, there's kind of a back and forth with the agent. It's kind of like a coach. We're hoping to invest in that more. We'd like to see more coaching come out of the agents, but for anyone who's interested, I mean, like pick it up and just get your hands on it, get your hands dirty, try to get an app out there. If your friends have a business or a band or something, try to build something. That's how it always happens. And then, maybe build up a portfolio. But also assume that we tend to hire folks with mobile experience, not necessarily Flutter experience. So, I mean, don't be shy to apply if you don't have Flutter experience, because we'll give you the time that you can learn, and we've got an awesome community of support, lots of support to help people out.
Super important insight. We hear from a lot of enterprise companies sort of this concern about, can I hire Flutter, like, senior level expert Flutter engineers? Well, it's really only been around for 7 years, like in production in major ways. So maybe there are some people out there that have 7 years of super high end complicated experience, but there's so few opportunities for that. But I think exactly what you're saying. It's harder, I think, to get the senior engineer skill set more generally, and then you can learn Flutter. Like, let's get that versus requiring people to achieve that level of expertise. Only using
Yeah.
Flutter this time is
Well, and I
probably
think also you have to consider like what are skills that are easy to acquire versus skills that are hard to acquire. Um, Learning a new technology is it's actually pretty easy to acquire. You can acquire new, and you can pick up a new framework, you can pick up a new language. You can learn a new language in a week or two, right? I mean, it's usually not that hard once you've like been coding for a while. The skills that are hard to acquire are things like organizational skills, good communication, teamwork, project management, deeper understanding of architecture, um, people who can interview other engineers, those types of skills. Like, can you grow? Can you mentor others? Like all those soft skills are actually what are probably the most valuable. And that the coding part, like, yeah, people can learn how to code. But for like a staff level engineer, principal engineer, we're talking 10, 15 years of experience of working in software. And, for most engineers that, software is going to come and go. Different frameworks are coming and going constantly. So usually you have to retool every 3, 4, 5 years anyway. So I think it's just par for the course for anyone who's been in the biz a long time.
That's great. One more question for you, just to kind of wrap us up.
Sure.
You've been through so many experiences already. You went through Uber and even your prior roles that you had now, SoFi. Probably a lot more ahead, right? A lot more experiences ahead. If you could look into the future and think about, like, one day you write a book or something about your professional experience, what do you think you would title it, and what would it be about?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I wrote this down just in preparation. So this is kind of one of my mantras, and I think this would be if I was writing a book on leadership or business, it'd be just called treating people right, and then how to motivate teams without burning out. I really think that if people are aligned and that you create good opportunities, they love working hard. People love doing hard things. It's usually hard things when you're not aligned that burn you out. You're not really excited about the work. You're grinding. This is just like day in, day out of doing things you don't want to do. But if it's exciting, you got good opportunities, you like your team, you want to show up to work, you want to put in those extra hours because you're passionate about it, and you're having fun, and you're shipping things, and you're growing as an individual. So I think that if you find the right way to motivate people, they won't burn out, and they'll actually come to work and want to work harder for you.
I love that. Well, thanks so much, Phil. Really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy day. I know you got a lot of people that you're accountable to, and not to mention customers and leadership. So I really appreciate this. I mean, the SoFi app has been I think, a real inspiration to a lot of people out there. Just seeing what you guys have accomplished, hearing those stats about how many engineers, number of lines of code, and the rapidly accelerating pace of that. As we're still building, I think we're still in the early phases of Flutter. And personally, I think Flutter is the perfect language and tool for AI enabled development too. And so it's just been great to see your story, and just really appreciate you coming on here today.
Cool. Pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for having me.
And if people want to learn about SoFi, or if you guys are hiring, where can they find out more?
Yeah, absolutely. SoFi.com. And yeah, we've got a jobs page. We're definitely hiring, and we'd love to have folks who have Flutter experience or, just mobile experience in general.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.